Well, welcome to the Get Fit with Jodelle podcast. I am, as usual, Jodelle, and I am excited to share with you some information that I think might be pertinent to what a lot of people are going through right now, kind of the allergy season, or just a lot of people are having the sniffles and the sneezes a lot. I get that a lot in my clients anyway lately. So are you sniffly and sneezy and fighting allergies constantly with all that's going on in the world? Do you feel like immune boosting is now more of a priority than ever? What about fat loss? That's a whole different topic, but getting rid of excess estrogen, is that on your radar too? Well, then you're going to really appreciate what my next guest will share with us. And he's here for the second time, Dr. Christopher Shade, PhD and founder and CEO of Quicksilver Scientific, a clinical lab creating cutting-edge systems of nutraceuticals for detoxification and antioxidant protection, immune upregulation, which we'll be discussing today during allergy season, as well as estrogen blocking and fat loss with one of my favorite naturally derived compounds, which we're going to talk about. And if you missed our previous podcast together, I will link it in the show notes below, so you can go back and blow your mind with that one too. So Dr. Shade, thank you for joining me, and let's blow some more minds today, okay?
Oh, it's one of my favorite things, Adele, so thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I have my theories, but I would love to hear yours on why allergies are more prevalent than ever. Because in the 80s, when I was growing up, I'm dating myself a little bit, but you didn't hear about allergies like you do today. So what do you think?
Yeah, it's like people, if they had allergies, they were allergy sufferers, but
Right.
There wasn't a whole wing of the pharmacy dedicated to all that stuff. And so why is it going on more than it used to be? It comes down to immune dysregulation, and what are the things that are doing this immune dysregulation? So we're not saying immune suppression, like we don't have an immune system. We have an immune system that's not accurately identifying what's a threat and what's not a threat. So when you talk about people in hypervigilance or fight or flight, well, hypervigilance as a mind, and I like to take the mind and the immune system together because they are reflecting each other. Mm-hmm. The mind, when you're hypervigilant, sees everything as a danger, and it's raising the alarm all the time. And, that's when we get into this fight or flight, where everything that comes at you during the day becomes this crisis. And on an immune level, we are seeing everything as a crisis. Now, there's a lot of stuff that goes into training the immune system when you're young. So training is a problem, and then adapting as you go along. And so we'll look at those as two different things. So training the immune system as to what to react to, what to not react to, is usually done by the probiotics in your microbiome when you're born. So when you come through the birth canal, you're inhaling, the vagina is dominated by Lactobacillus acidophilus. You're inhaling some of that. You're getting fecal matter that's coming out. I don't know if you've had kids, it's a little messy. Yeah. Everything's all over the place. And then the kid latches on to the boob, and you've got more probiotics there, and that's how it's seeded. And so it was shown a long, long time ago that the kids who were C-section kids had way higher allergies than the kids that were natural birth. Now, there's that thing, and there's also, how much do we sterilize the mom when the kid comes through? I remember, my wife getting swabbed down in betadine. She was practically all brown from all this stuff. And so how much does the kid get during all that? Mm-hmm. And then do we start giving the kids vaccines? I almost punched a nurse in the face because she pulled out a needle and was going to give him a Hep B shot. And they don't even have an established immune system yet. There is no reason whatsoever that you should go in with a viral antigen at that point to this little child. And when asked, under gunpoint, why she was going to do that, no, it wasn't under gunpoint, but I felt because it's very primal, it affects you as a father when this is going on. You're like, what are you all doing? Yeah. And it comes out that it's because in the inner cities, the birth is the only time the doctors are going to see the babies of the drug addict moms. And so they're giving them hepatitis B, which is a drug and sex disease.
Right,
So
right.
why is this baby going to have this? So you have this weird immune stimulation on the kid at a time where he should just be taking in the probiotics and the breast milk and starting to develop out the microbiome, because the microbiome then trains the immune system on how to deal with those things.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those early exposures, and then overuse of antibiotics, wiping out early microbiomes. There's a lot of data on that, increasing allergy sensitivity later in life. But then there's, what are the things affecting us right now? Mm-hmm. And all the stressors, from all the chemical stressors, all the EMF stressors, I believe that those
absolutely.
are a problem for us. All of our perceptive stressors of, oh my God, I have to be this, I have to be that, are all making the body chronically in this fight or flight, which is it's down-regulating glutathione processes and the formation of glutathione in the body. Mm-hmm. Now, glutathione, with the network of antioxidants that it works with and the network of detoxification elements that it works with, are responsible for free radical control and toxin control. But they're a major determinant of whether the immune system is going to be more Th1 dominant or Th2. Now, these are sort of generalized terms for something that's more just going in after pathogens when it needs to, that's Th1, or Th2, you start becoming hyper-reactive to all the antigens. Now, an antigen is really any chemical that's going through your GI tract or gets into your body, something you can become allergic to, like food. And so there's this combination of not having the early laying down of the microbiome correctly, killing the microbiome along the way and not regenerating it. Also, older, more traditional paths or societies had a lot more cultured vegetables and a lot more dirty vegetables. They didn't have to sterilize everything. They just yank it out of the soil. And a lot more exposure. When you're gardening and when you're around farming, there's airborne there's airborne microbiome coming at you all the time. And now, they call it the sanitization or the sterilization. I forget exactly the theory, but, we're the aseptic theory. We've cleaned everything too much. And really, we need a little bit of dirt around us all the time to keep that going. So what was your theory?
No, I'm so glad you brought up the stress, especially the EMF part, because I really feel like we've never in the span of human history had this much exposure to devices, and chronic Wi-Fi always around us and Bluetooth always around us. And I really think, and I've read studies about how it affects the cells of your body. So why not those immune cells that are trying to fight everything? They get bogged down, the mitochondria suffers, and then you can't fight all these normal things that 10 years ago you didn't have a problem with. And then you touched on, the aspect of sterilization. I mean, since COVID, we've been over sterilizing our bodies. Every time you walk in a store, you're using hand sanitizer. Well, how's your body going to fight when, you're killing off the bad bugs, but you're killing off every bug? Like, we're made of bacteria. So if we get rid of our good
COVID,
bacteria,
I mean, they pretty much figured out pretty quickly that it's all airborne. Yet everybody kept with the wash everything down, hand sanitizer, everything. And, even though that was not a real dogma. And so, there's very few things that are passed through touch, some of them, but not a whole lot of them. And so just constant sterilization. Our whole world has become sterilized. And now, instead of having a little garden out in the back and having natural soil and stuff, everything is weed killerized and and pesticides and just manicured everything. And there's none of that airborne natural bacteria coming at us.
Yeah. And so, I could go on and on with that. That's such an interesting topic, because the topic of glyphosate and everything, how it's affecting us. But since roughly, 70% of our immune system's in our gut, do you feel like gut is a major player with allergies as well?
So that microbiome going through the gut. So we said, if you don't have a vaginal birth, you're more likely to have this immune hyperreactivity. It's improper immune response. If you do too many antibiotics, you're likely to have that. If you're not constantly restoring, probiotics from your area, there was a friend of mine who got really sick and she was getting well, and cultured foods were a huge part of getting her well. And she talked about our culture, like what's our culture like, and how do you sit with people in your community, and how do you share culture? And in a more agrarian society, there's an airborne microbiome that we're all sharing, and we're touching, and we're not cleaning, and we're sharing. And that's, I thought it was a great word. What's your culture? And we've lost all that connectivity as to how we integrate into our life and into our space around us, and how we do that as a society and as a culture.
Yeah, we're supposed to touch each other. We're supposed to shake hands. We're supposed to hug. We're supposed to, our kids are supposed to play together and play in the dirt and get messy. And I mean, that's how we fight. That's why we have a virome too. That's this area of our body that is made as viruses that just infiltrate us at all different times, So I think that if people would just stop listening to maybe the dogma of sterilize everything and then get back to nature, I think that would be a really good aspect of somebody who suffers allergies. But speak to the person that maybe their allergies are so far gone that they can't. I have a client that can't even go outside. Like, she invited me to come pick the cherries off of her tree because she can't even pick them, and I feel so sorry for her. Where would she start other than working on the gut, which we're doing, but where else could she go from there?
All right, so let's look at a couple of things, and one of them works around the gut and something called AMPK activation, gut-liver axis through the whole body. And AMPK is what gets activated in the body when you fast, when you exercise, when you carb restrict. The whole keto thing is AMPK activated, and that has a big aspect to your immune system, both in calming the overreactivity and in being able to effectively take pathogens, break them down, and form antibodies to that. So we'll handle that, and we'll talk about more like first aid on allergies, and that's mast cell stabilization. And then working right on the immune cells so that they're less prone to this hyperreactivity. And those are the TH wings, TH1, TH2, TH17, and T regulatory. So, if let's go to the AMPK activity, because people don't know that as much. And so they'll see how that fits into this game. And then we'll go to the more common, the mast cells and the immune cells. AMPK, so we deal with leaky gut all the time, right? And as you work in fitness and diet, and you grew up in the 80s. So the food pyramid of the 80s, like all carb, no fat, led to the diabetes epidemic that we have right now. So 24/7 feeding with carbs lets your body think that you're in a harvest state of the year, and there's abundance of some sort of sugary thing around or starchy thing around. And so your body takes that in, and you tend to store most of that as fat. And then when you run out of that stuff, then you start using all that. Now, when you're storing, you're kind of laying down excess, and you're not pruning the tree. You're just getting the tree to grow big. But then the tree's kind of big and unruly, and you need to prune it. Right. And so that happens when you put the carbs away. And that normally would just go like this. It wouldn't be like, oh, I got my carbs at 8 a.m. I'll put them away at 9 until 12 and get some more. You got to be put away for a while. And when you do that, you then activate AMPK, and that goes to your body's stores of energy and mobilizes glycogen, mobilizes stored sugars, increases glucose transporters, and in doing is lowering insulin resistance. And mobilizes fat as ketones. And it does a very important process called autophagy. And autophagy is the breaking down of old cellular material or old cells, and breaking it down to its raw materials, and then making new ones. And so, like for mitochondria that have been damaged, it's called mitophagy. So this is essential recycling of old waste in your body and cleaning up, pruning the tree, coming to a higher state. Now, one of the things that goes with it, it also tightens up tight junctions. It repairs tight junctions at that time. So we have all this leaky gut, and leaky gut brings something called endotoxin into the body, which is an inflammation, creates systemic inflammation. And that and all the carbs is just making us big and fat and sick. And then when we AMPK activate, we clean up and we tighten up the gut lining. And we also lower the immunoreactivity inside the GI tract. So as you start absorbing things, one, you're absorbing less undigested things and endotoxin because of the tight junctions, and two, you're becoming less reactive to your foods. So often people become so reactive to everything, and you can't give them like, oh, here, take some berberine, that increases AMPK. And no, I'm allergic to it. Take some resveratrol. No, I'm allergic to it. Take some air. You actually get to nothing, where fasting is the only way through. And some of the sickest, most reactive people, fasting is the best thing that you can do, because it takes away the antigens, the continuous, because when people are bent towards allergy, I'm allergic to this food. So they go to this one, they keep eating it until they're allergic to that. And they're just cycling. Nothing at that point is the only way out. So that's when they're really bad. When you're not so bad, just intermittent fasting. Don't eat 3 times a day. Kill one of those meals and take things that are AMPK activators. Like in Quicksilver, we have the Keto B46, or the same thing under a different label, AMPK charge. AMPK, and these,
I love that product too.
I mean, that's like a staple here. We go through, so we have a liposome bar, and we just do that.
I constantly order that.
That stuff every day. We had a guy come to us from a multinational firm. He came from a beer firm, and he started taking that, and he barely changed anything else. And he's not even that tall. He might be like 5'7", 5'8". He lost 25 pounds in just a couple of weeks, just taking that. And just starting to just shave stuff down.
Yeah, like I said, it's a staple in my repertoire. And I don't even fast because I'm kind of an ectomorph. I'm active most of my day, so I need a lot of calories. So I don't fast except for the 12 hours when I'm sleeping. So from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. or whatever. But I take that AMPK first thing in the morning, and it just does something to my morning. It's like I don't have to go out on my walk like on an empty stomach. It just kind of like calms everything down. Like I have a little something going on. So I really love that product.
Yeah, it sort of like turns up the fire. And whoa! And then if you fast, then you go into ketosis, and if you don't, you just burn clean. And it's just amazing how that thing works. And there's things in there that are mast cell stabilizers.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
So AMPK, AMPK is going to lower your reactivity. It's going to open up more bile flow, which is going to digest more, which is going to feed your microbiome more and detoxify you more, because the toxins dysregulate you into this Th2 activity. But it is, so when you actually do get an infection, the first, you have your innate immune system, and it comes after it and it attacks it. But then the deeper response is to form antibodies. But the way you form the best antibodies is by taking those bacteria, viruses, funguses, parasites into an autophagosome, the same thing that you're going to put your mitochondria in. So you actually wrap a vesicle around the pathogen, and then you make what's called a lysosome, which has all the digesting chemistry. You fuse those together, and it's called an autophagosome. Now, all this is part of autophagy. So mitophagy is taking a mitochondria and breaking it down. This is called xenophagy. It's a xenobiotic. It's something from the outside. You break it down, and then you present it to the immune cells, and the immune cells make the appropriate antibodies to it. So that autophagic response, which is part of AMPK, is essential for the deepest levels of immunity, while the AMPK is trying to tamp down this false immunity of reactivity.
I love it.
So then we go over into mast cells, and then we'll go into the Th response of the immune cells. So mast cells are these big primordial immune cells. They've been around for a long, long time. And there's always these pictures of them degranulating. And when they degranulate, it's like clusters of grapes all around the outside. All of a sudden, they release all these things. And what they're releasing is little vesicles of histamine. And histamine is what we know with the allergic response. It makes you red and itchy and runny eyes and runny nose, red skin, blotchy, rashy. That's all a histamine response.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that does to you is make you exhausted and brain fogged. And so you just feel kind of crappy from that whole thing. And so a mast cell stabilizer keeps you from so easily releasing so many histamines. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the over-the-counter allergy formulas are mast cell stabilizers. Mm-hmm. Hormonal is a very famous one. Mm-hmm. But the natural compounds that have mast cell stabilization are quercetin and luteolin. Mm-hmm. And so quercetin and luteolin, especially in nanoparticles, can go in and stabilize really quick. So if you're exposed to something, you start getting stuffy and itchy and watery, you take the hist-aid in this.
Yeah, there it is.
There you go. There's the hist-aid. And very quickly you get symptomatic relief. And so that's really been a great one. And the mast cells also, before they release histamines, release a lot of other pro-inflammatory mediators. Mm-hmm. So some people, they'll eat some food and they'll get all brain foggy, but they're not getting blotchy and itchy. And so that's releasing pro-inflammatory mediators from the mast cells without releasing the histamines. Mm-hmm. And so it's a big, there's a couple of things that I do for food reactivity. Hist-aid is one. CBD is another, because the immune cells also have cannabinoid receptors and GABA receptors. GABA will also dim down that hyperreactivity. And then the other one is using DIM.
Yeah, which is also in the hist-aid, by the way.
Right. And so there's quercetin, luteolin, DIM, and vitamin C. Do you know why the vitamin C is in there for histamines?
Obviously, immune boosting, because it is an immune antioxidant.
Yeah, it's not exactly what you think. It's necessary for the breakdown of the histamines.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
So you've got three things keeping the histamine release and one thing helping the breakdown of the histamines.
Awesome. I want to go back to, you mentioned something about bile with this product, and I think we should be so in love with bile. Bile does so much in our bodies, and with regard to moving out toxins and getting rid of allergens and antigens, I think that bile is where it's at. So any product, like you mentioned, the AMPK that dials in the bile, go for it, because it's so good for bile production.
Right. And then if you're looking a little bit more directly at bile production and transport, you're looking at the bitters things like our products, Bitter X and Bitter 9. Mm-hmm. Milk thistle, one of the reasons milk thistle is so hepatic protective is it protects bile flow. When you're very toxic, the bile transport mechanisms will sort of get spooked by the toxins and they'll internalize out of the membrane they're supposed to dump bile out of, and they'll hide in a little liposome inside the cell. And the milk thistle's the taskmaster, says, stay and do your job. And then you move all the toxins out. But so bile flow, AMPK activity is doing that. Specifically, bitter compounds work directly on that. Phosphatidylcholine works on all that. And what's that doing for you? Now, it's moving all the toxins out of the cells, and that's helping to normalize your immune cell. But in the upper GI, bile is an antimicrobial. So all these people have what's called SIBO. When you're talking about or probiotics, most of that activity is in the lower GI, where it's more of a fermenter. The upper GI is more of a chemical reactor. But when this stuff starts growing up there, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth, bile is actually an antimicrobial detergent and washes a lot of that stuff away. So when you're trying to heal SIBO, you need bile flow as well as any antimicrobials you're using. And that's been a real game changer for people. And there's studies done on people, with poor bile flow and their susceptibility to SIBO and their recalcitrance to treatment, how often it recurs for them. So that's another one of the bile flows. And bile flow is also bringing glutathione down to the upper GI, where it actually uses it to detoxify things from the food. So bile is just a wonderful thing. And the connection between stress and bile flow and hormones and bile flow.
Ooh, so now you're speaking my language.
When you go into sympathetic overdrive, fight or flight, that's associated with the glutamate receptors. And glutamate is good for being on it and having memory, but when it's going too much, then it's anxiety and paranoia and freaking out, and it's putting your brain into an inflammatory condition that blocks the bile flow. Because when you're in fight or flight, remember, bile flow is digestion and detoxification. You just shut that the hell down and run away from the danger. So when you're all day thinking you're in danger, you're all day under detoxifying and under digesting, and that's where a lot of this stuff can come from. So you see a chronically toxic or SIBO patient, GI issues, you got to look at the mental construct that's going on there and how they deal with that. Now, how do hormones work with that? So estrogen is known for blocking bile flow. That's why in pregnancy there's a idiopathic, it's a cholestasis of pregnancy that happens because of the high estrogen levels. And so we know that it blocks that, but how does estrogen work in the brain? Estrogen, as we know, when you're estrogen dominant, what does it do? It makes you irritable, kind of bitchy and always in fight or flight. What does it do? It works on the glutamate receptors in the brain. And what do a lot of the toxins do? Mercury, mold toxins, they work on the glutamate receptors in the brain. Roundup, glutamate receptor. When anybody talks about an excitotoxin, that's working on the glutamate receptors. So estrogen is naturally making you predisposed to that. So what's the antidote to estrogen? It's not testosterone. It's progesterone.
Right.
So progesterone, if you taste progesterone, it is the most incredibly bitter of all the hormones. And it indeed opens the liver right up and opens the bile flow right up. And how does it work in the neurotransmission world? It is a stimulator of GABA activity, which is the balance to glutamate activity. And that's why if you're estrogen dominant, you're all like weirded out and you take some progesterone, just balances that all out. Yeah. So, and that's, I'll like, if I'm all jacked up, anxiety or just like, I take progesterone. It just works like, That's awesome. I'll tell you the first time I found this, because this is a really awesome story. I was the first male speaker at Emerging Women, which is an all-female conference.
Yeah.
And I was there for like 2 days. And then at the end of the second day, I go to this big dinner party with like 58,000 women and me. Maybe it wasn't that many, but all of a sudden I'm going through dinner and I just start having these like negative feelings about myself. And I just start sort of falling into a puddle. And I walk over, I was at a guest table, and I walked over to where my staff was, and they just looked at me and they go, "My God, what is wrong with you?" And I said, "I don't know." And then I'm like, I got estrogen dominance. And I ran over to where our booth was, and I had this nanoprogesterone, and I hit it just like that. God. Just like all this airborne signaling. I had never had so much of that before.
Oh, for sure. I totally believe in that, because it's kind of like when a bunch of have a bunch of sisters in one house and they're all on their period at the same time. It's the same principle. So no, and I'm so glad you tied in bile with hormones, because that is such a major player. Like, everybody's got to do their homework on how to increase their bile, because it's so effective to changing your physique, to changing your chemistry, to changing your moods. And so, I'm so glad you touched on that. So that's one tip. What are some more tips about
I developed most of those. I had a bitters product, but I had to go much deeper into it when I hired a couple of young women who had cycling problems,
Mm.
and the bitters was really key to getting them through their period.
Mm.
And the one ingredient that I put in the second generation bitters product was myrrh, and myrrh in Ayurveda is the most important bitter detoxifier, bitter bile, but it's the most important gynecological. It's like the base of all the gynecological formulas. So they said it moves stagnant blood out of the uterus. Well, it also moves stagnant bile out of the liver. So you see this reflexivity between the neurotransmitters, the liver, and the uterus all working together. And the ovaries have massive amounts of bitter receptors. The uterus has all the cannabinoid receptors. So for smoothing out periods, it was bitter X and CBD. And it was like, wow, that really goes a long way.
That's really interesting. So yeah, so that's a great tip for people to look into. Do you still make your nanoprogesterone? Because I haven't seen that.
Oh, I never sold it because
okay.
we're going to release a female hormone, female bioidentical replacement line,
Nice.
And for DHEA, estrogen, and testosterone, we have a nanoparticle DHEA that instantly partitions into testosterone and estrogen. It'll keep you up at the top range of testosterone while not having too much, because we tune in some aromatase inhibitors so you don't get too much estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a whole bunch of perimenopausal women on that. We've had them on that for 2 years, and we are holding off because we needed to get some patents, and we needed to get it was the patent so we could take that into compounding pharmacies.
Oh, wow.
But that product I mentioned is OTC. And then for progesterone, we have to do a cream to be OTC. So we made a nano serum of progesterone that gets you pretty good levels, gets you great sleep. And so those two can be OTC. The sublingual nano progesterone will be sold through compounding pharmacies along with sublingual nano testosterone and estrogen and DHEA.
Like in a troche, or just the same drops kind of thing? Okay. Wow, that's exciting. I didn't know about that with you guys, so I'm looking forward to that. So, so progesterone and the hist-aid are going to be a major player for allergies. Maybe what's one more tip you'll tell somebody? Obviously, they need to get their diet in check, get the gut in order.
Yeah, and eat less. The more reactive you are, the less you should eat. And because the eating less lets your immune system just chill the freak out. Because once the alarms start going up, they go crazy. So probiotics, based on your body type, like you said, you're an ectomorph. So a little less eating, AMPK activators, then the mast cell stabilizers, the quercetin, luteolin, and DIM. Progesterone creams would be very good for that. And then DIM. And the DIM, there is DIM and hist-aid, but then I kept it a little low because occasionally you get a woman who has a problem with DIM. But most women thrive on DIM, and most men thrive on DIM, and that's the thing that they miss. So let's talk about all the things that DIM does.
Yeah.
So at an immunological level, there's what's called the TH cells. So cells will go into this dominance, immune cells, of whether they're releasing TH1 or TH2 cytokines. So these are inflammatory messengers that work in different ways. TH1 is more associated with intracellular killing of pathogens, very direct, or killing of cells that are going bad, like precancerous cells. TH2 is more reactive and a little less specific. So it just kind of doesn't know what it's doing, and it winds up this inflammation, and it's more an allergic response. There's something that's even more reactive and damaging called TH17. In a lot of the gut issues like IBS, you get this TH2, TH17 polarization away from TH1. When you look at, and one of the things that drives that is having low glutathione levels. So if you see like lung-based infections that people tend to get recently, a lot of people, all this inflammation infiltrates into the lungs and they get a pneumonia. That is much more likely to happen if you're low in glutathione. If you're high in glutathione, the body exerts more of a TH1 response, more specific more, less generalist response, and it stays out of the lungs. It goes to where the infection is and does its work there. So that's an important thing to remember about that. But there's another poll called, if you have all those even too high, you get too much reactivity. And with food intolerances and food allergies, which is one of the ways that we react to things, and it's one of the ways that propagates the whole system having overreactivity, those tend to be Th2-17. So how can we shift to a less aggressive response? Mm-hmm. And here's what we want is immunotolerance. And there's something called T regulatory cells. Mm-hmm. So making these same immune cells T regulatory dominant. It's one of the things that probiotics do, is they make you more immunotolerant of the food that you're eating. Mm-hmm. So one of the compounds that shifts you from Th2, Th17 to T regulatory dominance is DIM. And I started taking DIM, playing around, because we were developing out this hormone line. And I was like, oh yeah, I hear DIM's good for hormones. I'll make this nano DIM. And I just started taking it, wondering what it would do to me. And all my food allergies started falling away. Yeah. And I just started taking it for a month. Everything just started feeling better. I was not like hiding from the world so much. And a lot of this was shifting into T regulatory dominance. But there's other things that it does epigenetically. One of the biggest uses of DIM in our whole pharmacopoeia of Quicksilver Scientific is in mold detoxification. Mm-hmm. Now, in our push-catch liver detox, you'll find quercetin, hist-aid, or quercetin, luteolin, and DIM in there to calm down immunoreactivity when you move toxins. But it's also when people get mold exposed, it shuts down what's called NRF2, which is a cellular response to toxins to turn up all your detox machinery. Mm-hmm. And that gets blocked. And so the liver becomes unable to really process the toxins coming at it. The mold builds up in the liver and it's just not able to do what it's supposed to do. And DIM is actually able to reverse some of this. Mm. And I found some papers where DIM was reversing a lot of epigenetic damages to NRF2 as well as GST, which is another glutathione gene. And so I think that that's what it's doing there, because we've seen a lot of people with just livers that weren't functioning. You give them DIM and everything functions better. And for men especially, this happens, and then they start lowering their estrogen load. That sort of, male boob activity starting to kick in, the belly's starting to kick in, and DIM just brings that all down. And, so many of my friends who've gone on to just doing the DIM are just like, God, this is just wonderful. So it's making you less reactive and more. And so it's all about, these sort of psychoses of your system. So you're being immunoreactive to mold, but you're not detoxifying it. Well, come on, let's get that going. You're immunoreactive to all your foods instead of letting them nurturing. Well, let's take that away, move over to nurturing. And if we go back to, relating the mind stream to this, it's get out of that fight or flight of the immune system where we think everything is a threat. Let's let things be nurturing to us again.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and just so people know, DIM is a plant compound. Nothing in your products, which I love, are unnatural. You find this in cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, and it's so effective not only for, we were talking about allergies earlier, but for reducing fat, like you said, and lowering excess estrogens, both in men and women. Even bodybuilders and physique, the physique world uses it. But how I got into it was exactly what you said. When I was going through my mold protocol, it was a big staple for me because I had to get rid of excess estrogens I had accumulated from the mold. The mold created estrogens within me.
Yeah, the mold stimulates aromatase.
Yes. And
when aromatase is high, it's turning all your testosterone over into estrogen, which is never a good deal. Fun. Then you just round out and get dopey and slow, but irritable. Yeah. And so that's what molds do. And so DIM starts getting rid of the estrogen and then shifting your liver's response and your cell's response to the mold away from just ignoring it to detoxifying it and getting rid of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it metabolizes estrogen down the right to hydroxyestrone pathway. Tell us why this is important.
Yeah, there's different, and then I was mistaken in my brain, but there's different metabolites of estrogen. Often we don't realize how much hormones we're creating and breaking down, creating and
Yeah.
breaking down, creating and breaking down. And the excess is because you're not breaking it down enough. But then some of the carcinogenicity, like estrogen is a known carcinogen,
Right.
but mostly during its detoxification path, if it goes down different paths. Now, there's two things that can happen. One is the hydroxyestrones, but then there are what are called quinones
Yeah.
of estrogen. And so in the hydroxys, you can have these 1, 4, and 16, and certain ones are good, certain ones are bad. And the DIM shifts you to the good metabolites. But over in the quinones, you want to be able to, if you have a certain SNP called cytochrome 1B1, then you want to be able to, instead of making these hydroxys, it makes a quinone, which is carcinogenic, but you want to move it very quickly out of there into phase 2, where you conjugate it with glucuronic acid, and then you move it over. And so DIM works on both sides to shift away from the bad metabolites and towards good metabolites, and then other bad metabolites that are inevitable to just quickly move them off into the next phase of detoxification.
Yeah, so while we're on the estrogen topic, maybe we just briefly touch on, what are some symptoms people might watch out for that DIM may actually help with this high estrogen issue, such as, fat gain in really weird areas like around your knees and your elbows and things like that. And low libido, that's one, but what are some other ones they should watch out for?
Well, then the neurological stuff. So you'll have anxiety and irritability, and not calm. And so you're wound up, but it's not wound up for the right reason, like libido. That's a good wind up. It's like, and you have anxiety about sex instead of wanting it.
Right.
So it's mentally that shift towards fight or flight. And then in the body, in guys, it's some stubborn belly fat, and especially when the chest starts getting a little fatty instead of muscular. And then women, it could go hips, it could, like you said, weird ones like knees and elbows. And it's just like, why, working out, why is this stuff here?
Right.
And so that blend of body and mood functions, then you're estrogen dominant.
Yeah. And then so some common causes of high estrogens can stem from obesity, excessive alcohol, and of course a high stress life. But what are some other factors you've seen in your experience for high estrogen?
Plasticizers, a lot of plasticizers are big. Phytoestrogens, so I'm sorry, xenoestrogens. So these are molecules that act on the estrogen receptor, even though they're not estrogen. So those will give you estrogenic symptoms. Then, as you said, the mold toxins increase aromatase activity, which is the enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen. So there's certain environmental toxicities that amongst the pesticides and herbicides, a lot of them work on estrogenic pathways. So just sort of general toxicity, lots of plastics will all make high estrogen load, and they'll damage the receptors. So we like a full detox so we'll start with our push catch liver detox and add in extra amounts of DIM. And then have people do that for a month, and that's really good to strip off the receptors and get a lot of the different toxins that are in there. Well, we'll add DIM and glutathione. All that together, you get a nice hormone wash.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it frees up bound up testosterone, right? So not only are you lowering the estrogen, but you're kind of freeing up the bound up testosterone.
Often you'll lower what's called sex hormone binding globulin, which is what's binding all the excess testosterone.
Okay.
In fact, we saw with that DHEA particle, everybody's sex hormone binding globulin went down, and everybody's testosterone went way up.
Cool. I'm excited about that. So what about, does DIM play into progesterone at all? Does it help with that?
I don't know specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, I can look into that, but That I don't know.
That would be interesting to know. So other than, yeah, it's great for lowering estrogen and even helping with fat loss, but it also acts on the immune system, like you meant, or like what you mentioned, and I actually saw something on viral infections and certain forms of inflammation. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what we want is the proper immune response. We don't want to react to the things that nurture us. We want to kill the things that aren't nurturing us. And DIM makes you de-reactive against, or lowers reactivity against foods. Yet it can increase the surveillance activity of the immune cells and their ability to provide correct inflammation to precancerous cells or viral activity. And so, what you don't want to have is something that suppresses your immune system.
Right.
You want it to put it into the right activity that you're going after with inflammation after the bad guys and not inflaming at the good guys. And that's what DIM seems to do. And I think that's why it's been such a, people who use it a lot are like, just freaking love it. Like you went through using it, I went through using it. A bunch of people around here have used it and are just like, oh my God, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. In the gym, I have people on it because it helps with faster recovery after their workouts. And even in guys, I read something about slowing the production of PSA for the prostate. So even stuff like that. I mean, there's so much. Yeah. And protection, like you mentioned, against cancer, but also atherosclerosis too.
I hadn't seen that, but in the prostate, in the epigenetic data I saw in early prostate cancer, they're called pin lesions before they've grown into a full tumor. And when that starts, it epigenetically shuts down NRF2, which is your whole, NRF2 is actually activates a family of genes for chemoprotection. And it shuts that down. And DIM was able to unleash that and open it all back up. One of the things that came out of the German biomedical world years ago was these guys taking tumors and analyzing them for toxins. And they found all these toxins in these tumors. And so they said, well, the toxins create the tumors. But the tumors, the formation of the tumor blocks detoxification. So it becomes a net toxin accumulator. So there's a little bit of a chicken or the egg that's going on and all that. But DIM, regardless, opens up detoxification again in the prostate at that cellular level. And then we see it opening detoxification at a whole liver level too. And it's an AMPK activator. So it does all these great things for us.
Yeah, I love your liver and try some DIM. So now that we know the importance of it and how it can assist us, what's the proper dosage like for men and women? Because I've heard conflicting stories. I want to ask you about your product too, because your product seems to have lower doses in it, but yet yours is nanoparticles. So I'm wondering if it's getting more in.
Vastly lower dose in theirs.
I have your just DIM product too, which I love.
And so, and we tend to do 4 pumps of that as a dose, twice a day when you're actively using that. And then you can use it intermittently after that. And so that's only 40 milligrams twice a day. That's 80 milligrams. A lot of people are using 200 to 300 milligrams twice a day. We haven't done the uptake studies on the nanoparticle of DIM versus regular DIM, but it's anywhere from 5 to 10 fold increase in absorption.
Nice.
So you're let's see, 40 twice, 80. Yeah, you're looking at 400 to 800 milligrams worth in a regular capsule that you get in a nanoparticle.
Wow.
One of the things, sometimes it's even beyond just that translation there, because a lot of compounds are metabolized as they're absorbed across the GI tract. And a lot of what they're known to do is from cell culture studies. And so the nanoparticles get unmetabolized compounds into the blood. That's why, and it gets them all in really quick. So they go to high levels and they do the triggering that they need to do. Most of the work that you're getting out of phytochemicals, plant chemicals, is triggering different gene sets or different biochemical pathways. And that happens at peak dose, not low and slow. Some sort of vitamins you might want like niacin in a slow release. But for the phytochemicals, you want a big sharp pop of it. And that's what you get in the nanoparticles, and you get them unmetabolized. And that's why AMPK charge doesn't have all that much. It's got like 40 milligrams of each of those compounds, yet it puts you into ketosis. Like if you did that all in capsules, even if you took 5 or 10 times as much, it wouldn't do that. So that's the uniqueness of the nanoparticle delivery. And I think that's why, the experience is so strong when you do it that way.
Super cool. Okay, because before your product, I was taking, 150 milligram capsule. And so when I look at this product, I'm like, oh, well, it's 40. That seems low, but yet it's a totally different delivery system. So
totally different.
Yeah. So, what's the difference between sublingual and then it has to go through the digestive tract?
Yeah.
Is it that tenfold you were mentioning?
Yeah, well, I'm saying it's probably at least that. Look at quercetin, it's 25-fold. Curcumin, for some like raw curcumin, it's almost 300-fold. So it depends what the native absorption is, and I don't know what the native bioavailability of DIM is. I know it's fairly low. So, CBD, it's a 6x. Like I said, quercetin is 25, and some are even higher. So I'm estimating DIM to be in that 5 to 10x range.
Very cool. So yeah, people need to check out DIM. They need to check out your products because you've made it so effective and so easily available, and they're tasty too. Like I really love the taste of most all the products. So yeah, where can people learn more from you specifically? Because you are an excellent wealth of knowledge. And if folks want to work directly with me with nutrition consulting, I offer Quicksilver Scientific through my full script, or we can put a link in the show notes that will send them right to the website too.
Yeah, so Jodelle get them fulfilled to you if she's working with you on programs. The Full Script is a great group. And then we also do some direct-to-consumer through quicksilverscientific.com and on an Amazon site from Fortress Brands. But go and work with Jodelle. She'll get you all hooked up.
And what about you?
See more about me. We have a YouTube channel, Quicksilver Scientific YouTube channel. There's tons of videos on there. There's drchrisshade.com where I started doing podcasts. There's a podcast with me and Mark Hyman recently, and Matt Cook, and Amy Killen, my favorite sex therapist. Well, she's actually, injections and stuff.
So
everything about sex and stem cells. And,
the O shot.
The O shot, the B shot. Yes, all of those great enhancements.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm going to check out your podcast. I didn't know you'd started that. So I'm a big podcast nut. So no, thank you for this. This has been amazing. I hope people will realize what wonderful technology you're putting out there and support your work too. So
thank you so much, Jodelle.
Yeah, thank you. So we spend a lot of time in our life these days on Zoom or on FaceTime or on a computer, and you really have to dial in that blue light exposure if you find that you are someone who is chronically on a device. And that's why I recommend the daylight blockers from Swanwick Sleep. I use them in many of my podcasts, and I use them anytime I'm on a Zoom that's kind of in the midst of the day when it's really bright outside already and my screen is bright. I only want so much blue light during the day, and mostly I get that from the sun. I don't want any extra from my computer. So if you really want to dial in your sleep at night, get your circadian rhythm and your blue light exposure in the day dialed in. Then after the sun goes down, if you're still on Zoom, which you got to go outside at some point and get some grounding if you're on that device so much, but get their nighttime blockers so that at least if you're on that Zoom call after the sun goes down, you can still release melatonin and sleep well. So if that's you, if you're looking for those kind of products to help dial in that circadian rhythm, dial in your sleep at night, wake up refreshed so you can do those Zoom meetings all over again, make sure you visit swanwicksleep.com. Use my code Jodelle10 and enter that for 10% off your pair of day blockers or nighttime blue blockers.